World Minute, the Minute by Minute podcast reviewing the 1997 sequel Jurassic Park, 1 minute at a time. I'm Brad.
I'm Dave.
Today we're here to discuss minute 65 of The Lost World. Dave, slow news week, slow news month.
Yeah,
But,
it was.
Yeah, one little bit of news that popped up over on Real News Hawaii that wasn't involving Fallen Kingdom. They posted up a little bit of a feature on their Facebook page showing the actual progression of the Jurassic log that pretty much every Jurassic fan that goes to Hawaii gets on the ranch tour and wants to go and get a photo with the log. And they're told on that tour that it is the original log from the original filming, but that was only the case up until 2012, when it was replaced by a similar log that was found locally. But there is some remnants of the old log, because after that much time it had rotted severely. They got some photos there of it sort of later in life, and it's actually in a couple of pieces.
Yeah, well, that's to be expected. I mean, it is made of wood, and it's in a tropical environment. Wet wood rots fast, you know?
Yeah, and that's one thing that's sort of interesting when we get later on to the worker village stuff, where apart from the operations building, all the other structures are made of timber, which shows their sort of decay really well. But one thing I have noticed, or one thing I did notice in Jurassic Park 3, and put this up simply to production, the same similar architecture buildings still made of wood, yet only showing the same amount of decay as what we see in The Lost World, but it should be 7 or 8 years later, not 4, so...
Yeah.
But that's a tropical climate as well. That's why when we seen the East Dock sign when Colin tweeted that out before Jurassic World, it was like, really guys, come on. 20 something years and the sign's still there, it's still got the lettering on, and it's laying on the jungle floor too, which would hasten its decay. But
Oh, yeah, really. And then, even then, at least it didn't make it into the final movie, though, you know?
Yeah, we did get an erected sign, the research sign, but again, only a small wooden post going into the ground. You'd think the termites would have got to that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little Easter egg for the film, so we'll let it have that.
I honestly felt it was more so an Easter egg for the game, actually. That research sign?
Yeah.
I thought that was more of a research for Jurassic Park, the game. That came out from Telltale.
Which was hinting at a much bigger park area and more involved than just a visitor centre that we see in the film. And that's what Colin said when he used that research sign instead of the East Dock sign in the film. He just wanted to build that world. That, okay, you've only seen so much of it in both films, but there's so much more there, and whether or not we get to see more of that in Fallen Kingdom, that's yet to be seen. Hopefully we do.
Robert Burke said that the T-Rex was a rogue who would abandon its young at the earliest opportunity. I know I can prove otherwise.
All right, ready to get into 65.
Sure.
As we entered minute 54 of The Lost World, the trailers and Eddie's M-Class went sailing over the cliff, leaving the 3 survivors dangling from a rope. Sarah was the first to emerge over the cliff and was helped up by Roland, followed by Nick, then Ian. As we start, all 3 of them drop to their knees in exhaustion, surrounded by the hunters and their weapons. Kelly runs in from the left and hugs Ian as the dramatic music ends. At 65 minutes and 15 seconds, we cut back to the hunters' base camp and a destroyed satellite dish. Roland's informing us that all the communications equipment was destroyed, and if the Gatherer's satellite phone was in the RV that went over the cliff and stuck here thanks to Ian and his crew. Tensions escalate. Nick tells Roland that they only came to watch and that the hunters come to strip mine the place. Ludlow tries to counter with at least they were prepared, but Ian comes right back. The 100-mile electrified fence and 5 years of planning wasn't enough to save the other island. What were they expecting here? Nick comes back with they have no right. But Ludlow tells him an instinct animal has no right. It exists because we made it, we patented it, we own it. At 65 minutes and 48 seconds, Dieter Stark pushes his way past RJ. and walks back up to the front of Nick. Nick asks if he has a problem. Dieter says, yeah, I found you, didn't I? The two go at each other. Hunters scramble to pull the men apart. At 65 minutes and 56 seconds, Roland breaks in between the two of them as they're pulled apart and says, hey, I know you. You're that Earth First bastard, aren't you? And this ends minute 65 to the Lost World. As we ended 65, as we ended 64 last week, we had Sarah reach the top and Roland helped her up. After rewatching that scene, it wasn't RJ beside Roland, and it wasn't Dieter either. It was just some random hunter.
Yeah, with a light pack on him.
Yeah, that then he helps Nick and Ian up, and you can see RJ's sort of behind the two of them. He's really the only one that looks like he's keeping watch with his rifle, because of course the Tyrannosaurs have only just left the area. But everyone else seems occupied.
Everyone else is kind of just looking around. They probably are. I would assume they're on the lookout, keeping their heads on the swivel about possible predators coming back. But yeah, RJ seems like the only one who's actually prepared for them to come back.
Yeah, and we see later on when they start trekking through the jungle that there's a lot more than what we see here. So you can safely assume there's other teams out either keeping a perimeter or just keeping their eyes out for the Rexes. But our three heroes drop to their knees exhausted, and we get Kelly running from the left of screen, which is a bit odd because every time we've seen Malcolm run into the camp, even Eddie driving into the camp, it's been from the front or to the right. So whether she come with someone or she made her own way there, she's on the scene now too and has given Ian a big hug. And then we cut back to the Hunters' camp, making use of this great set one more time. We've got a destroyed satellite dish on the ground, and the little voiceover from Roland saying the communication equipment's been destroyed, and if your satellite phone was in those trails that went over the cliff, Ian butts in and says they were. He says, then we're stuck here, ladies and gentlemen, no thanks to you people. And we've got the group of survivors and hunters around this dish, about to go at each other.
Yeah, now we see Burke picking around in the satellite dish here. Presumably this was the satellite dish that had been attached to the back of the Humvee that we saw earlier.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what is he picking around for? You know?
And where's the Humvee gone? It should be laying on top of the dish, unless they've pulled the dish out and it's sort of sitting there for this scene to take place.
Yeah, I always kind of assume it just broke off.
Yeah, well, they'd try and salvage it anyway and try to see if it's usable, so they'd need it out from underneath the Humvee for that. But yeah, why is the dinosaur guy assessing the condition of the satellite?
I know, really. You think one of the AV guys they brought along would have done that? Yeah,
there's a few of those. Yeah, I don't know. Well, there's a guy with the really long hair that we see here in a minute pull Dieter and Nick apart, but...
But I think it's interesting how Dieter's just kind of trying to instigate this fight, which is really, I mean, when you put these kind of two personalities together, anywhere in the world, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know? Nick's agitated and Dieter's looking for a fight. And I was just watching, it's Armistice Day today that we're recording this. Armistice Day for you guys, Veterans Day for us in the States.
Yep.
And they had the Pacific on HBO. We were running the series.
Oh, yeah? Yep.
And it was just funny because, I mean, my dad was in the service, so he knows how it goes, how when you just stick a bunch of guys together, they just mess with each other all day long. You know? And this happens. One of the characters is messing with a guy, and he ends up getting his lights punched out, and they're getting in a fist fight.
Yeah.
That's just what guys do. We're like that. We put a bunch of us together with no women, and we're suddenly turning into cavemen.
Well, you can only imagine what happened between them leaving the cliff area and coming back to camp. Just Dieter in the background, just sizing him up.
Yeah, definitely.
Because Nick takes the opportunity to offer his own opinion on the situation, and says, "Hey, we came here to watch." Now, there's a couple of bits of dialogue here that sort of blend and merge together. I always thought it said you come to strip bare the place, but it's actually strip mine the place. And sort of Dieter gets right up close into his face here, and Nick's, hey, back off. And
Yeah.
and Peter Stormare pulls this fantastic sort of, oh, I'm scared. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
They're just two kids going at it. Like,
Oh yeah, definitely.
you nearly want them
And
to.
these are the kind of personalities that you get, and they just clash so terribly.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. I'd love to see Muldoon and Roland sort of in the same situation, whether they'd sort of step up as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also another thing is that Muldoon was a park ranger, whereas Roland was is just a big game hunter. So he it's like one, they feed off each other, but they're also on different sides. Because Muldoon is on the supply side, while Roland is on the demand side. You know?
But I'd nearly see Muldoon as being a hunter to start with, and sort of maybe the progression post Roland, where he's done it all. He's sort of where Roland is at the end of the film, where he's done it all. He just wants to sort of look after the animals now, try and save them from other hunters doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Possibly, anyway. But Ludlow sort of steps in here and says at least they come prepared. And Ian just gets this weird look on his face and going, what, prepared? And Ludlow counters with, you destroyed all our equipment. And we get Ian again, 5 years of work and 100 miles of electrified fence couldn't have saved the other island. What do you think? A couple of dozen Marlboro men were going to make a difference here? Where?
Yeah, Marlboro men being the typical cowboys.
Yeah.
You see the cowboy boots, the 10-gallon hat, the skinny jeans, the vest, the flannel, all that.
The smoking.
So, what's that?
The smoking.
Yeah, really. And so, they're kind of like typically cliche for the gun-ho American, which is really what he's describing here. Is how he just brought a bunch of gung-ho idiots to this island expecting them to be professional.
Yeah. Yep.
Which we're clearly seeing here from Dieter, which was meant to be the second in command, clearly not being professional.
Yeah. And that's probably why he's sort of... Because Roland made the comments before, this is the last time I leave you in charge, Dieter's pretty much had this whole incident put on his head, or in his shoulders, as being the one at fault, because he didn't see someone come in and sabotage everything, but... He's sort of looking at the one that's responsible for doing it and singles Nick out as that person. So, and
well, it is, somewhat his fault, because he was supposed to be watching the camp, and him and every other person in the camp was just gathered around Ludlow as he gave his speech to the engine board.
Yeah, but then why is Ludlow saying, "Hey, go and do your stuff, stop hanging around here" or something? It's
because Ludlow's an idiot.
Yeah.
Ludlow's a glory hound idiot, and I find it interesting that they purposely included in this scene that the first thing we see him grab, or when he looks down, is a flask.
Yeah. Yep.
Guy's clearly trying to drink his problems away. He's been doing so on the island the whole time. And if we got that lead scene that we talked about earlier, where Ludlow broke the baby's leg, we'd see that Ludlow is just a drunken idiot.
Yeah. And that was going to be a question.
He has no idea what he's doing.
Yeah, and that was going to be a question I was bringing up. There's a couple of points here where he trails off, or he doesn't quite seem coherent, and I'm just wondering how drunk he still is from the incident earlier. Because he was stumbling around that table.
Sorry?
He was stumbling around that table when he was doing
that. Yeah, that's what I mean. But I have a feeling that when the camp got trashed, he got sobered up a little bit. You know?
Well, as we see at the end of minute 66, he sort of rediscovers that hip flask again, which makes me wonder, okay, he hasn't had any alcohol since the camp was destroyed, but you'd think if you just dodged a Triceratops charging through a tent, the first thing you'd want to do is try and find that broken case of scotch and get something out of it, but
I just think it's funny how you can see it, especially during this scene, is that from this point on, Roland clearly does not trust Ludlow at all.
Mm.
As soon as Ludlow brings out the map to the worker village, he's just like, okay, I'm taking this. Here, Ajay, take care of this. I'm not letting Ludlow be in charge of this.
Yeah, exactly. And
And he's
that's
just the one leading the charge from here on out. It's may have been Ludlow's financing, but Roland's in charge.
yeah, and it's like Roland's intro with the monologue where he's sort of, you're in charge. That's fine. But he doesn't want to listen to any more suicidal ideas, and sort of now it's the point where Ludlow's stuffed up and he's gone, right, I'm taking control. Because again, like in the next minute as well, like you're just saying with that, and also Ludlow says there's a problem with going to where they're going, and sort of trails off because he finds his hip flask, and Roland's like, what's the problem, and gets annoyed at him because he's more concerned about his hip flask than telling the group why trekking to the centre of the island's an issue, but we know why that is. But it's good here too, because sort of whether he's drunk or not, Ludlow sort of scoffs at the comment, and sort of he's just pointing his torch down, looking at the remains of the dish, and sort of really ignoring what Ian's saying. But then Nick sort of pipes up again, and it's a looter mentality, and you only care with what you can take, and that they have no right. And Ludlow sort of gets serious for a minute here and says an extinct animal brought back has no rights. It exists because we made it, we painted it, and we earned it. Well, it's actually we own it, but it sounds like he's saying we earned it.
An interesting morality question there I wouldn't mind discussing now is that does an animal brought back from extinction, say they bring back the dodo, does that animal possess the same animal rights as, say, an orangutan in Sumatra? Does it have the same rights as an endangered animal? Does it have the same rights as any animal not to be abused or to be mistreated or to be starved or anything like that?
Exactly.
Or is it a company's intellectual property?
Yeah.
I think that brings up a very important morality question that I know I've certainly engaged in debates with the fans with.
And especially at this point too, where it's still a secret. It's they've done all this secret research on the islands, and they've brought these animals back. So you could sort of go after dodo thing as well, as what then happens if that population were to get out of control or to grow, because I might be confusing my birds, but weren't they the ones that sort of took over other birds' nests? Or was that the boo-boo?
I don't believe so. The problem with dodos is that they bred very slowly. So when humans brought pigs to, like, it was some island, Mauritania, I want to call it. I can't remember what it was, but it was a small island off the coast of Madagascar, which was where these birds mainly lived. And humans brought pigs with them, of course, because they brought pigs pretty much wherever they went.
Yep,
and that's
livestock.
why we have wild hogs in the United States, which are a problem.
Yeah, we got the same problems here.
Yeah, and so the pigs would eat the dodo's eggs, and dodos are slow to breed. So that's what partially caused their extinction, along with humans just seeing these animals as a phenomenon and killing them off because they just wanted them to be trophies, and some even ate them. Some people, they became like a prized delicacy. Some museums wanted them all over the place. I remember reading a horrible story about how this one museum, it was like the last breeding pair of, I can't remember, it was in the Arctic, it was some Arctic bird, and they only bred on this one island, or on these select few islands within the Arctic. And so what happened was, because museums were in such demand for specimens of this bird, that people would go out and poach them. And the last breeding pair were hunted down and found on this island. The eggs were smashed because they were of no scientific use, and they killed the birds. For science. For science, they created an extinction.
Was that to sort of taxidermy the birds so they had a physical representation of them in the museum, or was that for something else?
I think it was just for scientific study.
Okay, because that's, well, yeah, even that's another dark thing as well. If you only got a couple left and you want to preserve their DNA or what they actually were by killing the last ones that are left.
Exactly.
There's been some things hinted about Fallen Kingdom that there might be some animal rights stuff involved in that, but it'd be interesting to see it sort of brought to the forefront, or at least mentioned in the films, because it's a very serious question. But again, sort of, you've got a population of a couple of hundred animals, if that, on Sauna. As far as we know, nothing on Nublar, so it's the Sauna animals we're looking at here. Because they've been brought back by the lab, but now you've got you're onto maybe second, third generation animals. Are they patenting it to InGen? Is there a point? Is there a point where the animals breeding their genetic makeup gets away from what InGen created in the first place?
I wouldn't say so. I'd have to say that because it's basically they're all clones of the same, so they're all clones of the same animal.
Yeah.
I'd say that inbreeding and incest would be more of a problem than anything.
So instead
of
a
lack of genetic diversity.
Yeah. So instead of it leaning out,
you get odd mutations, like when you over inbreed a dog. You know.
Yeah, and that way you'd get sort of more of the InGen DNA material spread around and it actually being weaned out of them. And then you get tiger raptors and maybe Jurassic Park free raptors. if you sort of use that to explain the differences in species or subspecies. Being only 4 years out, I'd probably say yes, they're still InGen's patented property. But I think if they got to a larger number, you'd probably start saying, right, even now it's a self-contained ecosystem, so they're doing fine by themselves. There's no InGen hasn't helped them to this point. So you could say, okay, you had the property. We can only assume they took the patent out for more than 12 months. Might have been, it'd have to be more than 5 years. I don't know how you patent a dinosaur. That's another question altogether.
Yeah, really.
Which will probably.
But I think it was more so they patented the the version numbers and the DNA sequences that they created. Not necessarily they told the patent office they created dinosaurs, but they created this DNA sequence that was thus it was like it's like Apple patenting the the OS X system. It's not exactly they didn't patent the plastic tubing around the iPhone.
Yep.
I mean they did, but I think the guy actually got struck down when Samsung copied the design and said, and the court said you can't just copy a shape or you can't patent a shape.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean they own the OS within that shape. They own all the components that create the shape, but they don't actually own the shape itself.
Yeah, yeah. InGen would have
own the dinosaur itself, but they do own the DNA and everything that makes it up.
Yeah, the gene splicing, all that sort of scientific stuff required to do it, or to make something they've probably patented, but not the actual animal itself.
It's not like a museum's got to send InGen a nickel every time they mention the word Tyrannosaurus, you know?
Yeah.
It'd be brilliant if they could, but I don't think they could get away with that. But yeah, you brought up Fallen Kingdom earlier, and I think that's what's great about The Lost World is that it does have this message. It does have this kind of anti-animal cruelty message. And that was something that I really wanted for Jurassic World to have, and I think I brought this up earlier, or previously in previous minutes, is that I wanted the movie to have this kind of blackfish message. It seemed like a very timely moment to bring it up, you know?
Yeah, and we've seen earlier too, like, when Ludlow was doing his little investor meeting, we've seen what Jurassic Park San Diego looks like. Small cages. He said that Hammond's dream was ultimately impossible, and they want to go back to that small amphitheatre type setup. Well, that's a problem in itself, where you've gone from having a large biological preserve with these animals sort of only really sectioned off by fences. Well, the herbivores weren't. It was just the dangerous ones had the fences. And you're going to bring them back to these refined or small cages, concrete and probably fake flower, fake greenery and all that sort of stuff, and just create this fake world with your animals in it. Maybe not so much in 1997, but definitely now. If any idea like that was floated, you only got to look at sort of the issues going around with sort of caged hens and shed farms, like farms that are inside buildings and stuff like that. And even zoos are still struggling from time to time with protesters and that because of the whole animal rights stuff there as well. And they're actually living and sometimes near endangered animals that couldn't survive out in the real world. There are some bad zoos, but there are a lot of other ones as well that sort of have their wildlife rescue sort of stuff that happens, and it's just interesting how dinosaurs would fit into that whole equation.
I also kind of wanted to bring up that going back to what I said about those Arctic birds, is it almost kind of echoes what Ian Malcolm said in the first movie about how what you call discovery, I call the rape of the natural world.
Yeah.
In a way, and that's, you can still kind of feel that vibe going on in this scene here where we see Ludlow and Ian butt heads. I
think too at this point he's beyond a discussion about it. He's been doing that since '93. We even done it then on the island and was ignored, and he was right. We got some good stuff going on in the background here too. So the hunters all checking supplies, which was a lot more in the forefront in the pre-San Diego script, and even in the other script where they do a bit of a inventory of what's left. And we get to see some of those major league toys, as Eddie described them. Those shoulder-mounted flashlights or lights they've got are actually, there's a collar they put around their neck with sensors in it, so when they turn their heads, the lights actually pivot on the shoulders with their head movement. So if they look left, the lights look left, and so forth. So it's sort of showing some of the other stuff that's left that didn't get destroyed in the Stampede. But we don't get to see any of that because Dita comes back into the frame, and Nick sort of looks at him. "You looking for a problem?" And Dita says, "Yeah, I found you, didn't I?" and and the two men go at it, and we get hunters. Like we get Sarah saying hey, and get the hunters. Burke sort of goes after Dita to try and pull him back, and it's interesting here too because we get Carter. Get to see Carter again, sort of come in, and he's one of the main ones that push Dita back out of the way. And Roland steps in between the two and sort of points at Nick. "I know you. You're that Earth First bastard, aren't you?" And that's where the minute leaves off. So we get to see the rest of that conversation in the next minute. And even though it's not in the film, where Roland recognises Nick from. But anything else on 65 you want to bring up before we get out of here?
No, I think we covered that one pretty thoroughly.
Awesome, okay.
Alright guys, let's get the hell out of here.
Contact details are on the website, thelostworldminute.com. You can email feedback to thelostworldminute@gmail.com, Facebook, The Lost World Minute, Twitter @TheLostWorldMinute, and Instagram, The Lost World Minute.
Easy to remember.
Yeah, very easy to remember. Right. David, thank you for joining me for this record.
You're welcome.
And we'll be back. I've been Brad.
I'm Dave.
And we'll talk to you all later. Goodbye.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
It is absolutely imperative that we work with the Costa Rican Department of Biological Preserves to establish a set of rules for the preservation and isolation of that island. These creatures require our absence to survive, not our help. And if we could only step aside and trust in nature, life will find a way.